In a quiet and remote village, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, there once lived a dog. He was no ordinary dog, for his hunger knew no bounds. Day in and day out, his mind was consumed by thoughts of food, and his belly constantly ached with insatiable greed. Unlike the other animals in the village, who were content with what they found or were given, this dog was different. He could never be satisfied with what he had. The pangs of hunger were more than just physical for him. They had become a deep craving that gnawed at his very being. Every morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the dog would set out on his endless quest, wandering through fields, along dusty roads, and even into the village's crowded marketplace. His eyes were always scanning for anything edible, no matter how small or insignificant. And when he found food, whether it was a discarded scrap, a crumb fallen from someone's meal, or even a piece of meat stolen from another animal, he would gulp it down with lightning speed. In that fleeting moment of satisfaction, he would make himself a promise. This is enough. I will be content with what I have. I will no longer chase after food. But these words were empty, a mere whisper to himself that faded as quickly as it came. Not even seconds after filling his stomach, the dog's thoughts would return to food. His mind raced with worry. What if there wasn't enough for tomorrow? What if he missed out on something better? What if another animal found food before him? These questions plagued him, and the dog, who had just promised himself satisfaction, would once again set off, wandering, searching, and scouring every corner of the village. His greed drove him to desperate lengths. If he saw another animal with food, he would snarl, bark, and chase them off, grabbing the food for himself. Even if he had just eaten moments earlier, he couldn't bear the thought of someone else having what he could possess. The other animals began to avoid him, wary of his constant hunger and selfish behavior. It wasn't that the dog was mean or vicious by nature, but his endless greed had clouded his judgment, making him act in ways that drove others away. Despite all his efforts, despite all the food he consumed, the dog was never truly happy. He spent his days and nights in constant pursuit, never experiencing the peace that came from contentment. Each time he found food, he told himself it would be the last time he'd feel this desperate need. But deep inside, he knew the truth. His greed would never let him rest. The promise he made to himself was always broken, and the cycle continued. No matter how much he had, it was never enough. The dog had become a prisoner to his own desire, endlessly chasing something that could never truly satisfy him. One warm afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky and the village bustled with the usual noises of daily life, the dog found himself once again wandering aimlessly, searching for food as he did every single day. His stomach growled incessantly. Though he had already eaten earlier in the day, his hunger was never about need. It was about a constant, gnawing greed that seemed to control him. Nothing was ever enough. No matter how much he ate, he always found himself craving more, always on the lookout for his next meal. His home was situated near a quiet river that meandered through the village. A wooden bridge stood over it, connecting one side of the village to the other, making it easy for villagers and animals alike to cross the gentle waters. That day, after having scoured the familiar grounds near his house and coming up empty-handed, the dog decided to try his luck on the other side of the river. Maybe there's food waiting for me there, he thought, his eyes glinting with hope and greed. He trotted toward the bridge with determination, his nose twitching in the air as he searched for any trace of food that might be lingering nearby. As he stepped onto the old wooden planks of the bridge, he glanced over the edge at his reflection in the calm water below, but quickly dismissed it. He was too focused on his quest. Once he reached the other side, he began his usual routine, sniffing around, poking his nose into bushes, and circling small huts that lined the riverbank. But to his growing frustration, he found nothing. No scraps, no crumbs, not even a discarded morsel from a villager's meal. His frustration began to rise, but just as he was about to give up, his sharp eyes spotted something gleaming in the distance. It was lying outside a small weathered hut, almost as if it had been left there just for him. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. A large, juicy bone. Not just any bone. It was the kind of bone that would take hours to gnaw through, the kind that would keep him satisfied for a long time. His mouth watered at the sight of it. Without a second thought, he raced toward the bone, his paws kicking up small clouds of dust as he ran. Reaching the prize, he snatched it up in his mouth, his teeth sinking into the hard, savory surface. He felt a surge of triumph as he held it tightly between his jaws. "This is mine," he thought, his eyes darting around suspiciously, worried that someone might try to take it from him. He was filled with greed, consumed by the fear that one of the other animals might see him with the bone and demand a share. Quickly, he would cross back over the bridge and take it home, where he could enjoy it in peace, far from prying eyes. He imagined himself lying comfortably in the shade, chewing the bone for hours without interruption, savoring every bite. As he stepped onto the bridge, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, a rare feeling for the dog who was never content for long. This bone would surely make him happy, at least for a little while. But as he crossed the bridge, something caught his eye. It was a reflection in the water below, shimmering in the sunlight. Curious, he paused for a moment and looked down. There, in the clear water, he saw another dog staring back at him. And to his astonishment, the dog in the water was holding a bone, just like his, only this one looked even bigger and juicier. His greedy mind quickly jumped to conclusions. Without thinking, the dog opened his mouth to bark at the reflection, trying to scare away the other dog and snatch the bigger bone for himself. But the moment he opened his mouth, his own bone slipped from his jaws, tumbling into the river below with a loud splash. The water swallowed it up in an instant, and the dog watched helplessly as his prized possession sank out of sight, carried away by the current. Realizing what had just happened, the dog's heart sank. He had been tricked by his own reflection, his own greed. The bone he had worked so hard to find was gone, all because he couldn't resist the temptation of wanting more. He stood on the bridge for a long moment, staring at the water, his stomach now as empty as it had been before. But worse than his hunger was the deep sense of loss that washed over him. The bone had been his, and in his selfishness, he had let it slip away. With his head hanging low, the dog slowly made his way back to his side of the river, empty-handed and full of regret. His greed had once again left him with nothing, a lesson he had been taught many times but never seemed to learn. It was only then that he realized the other dog was merely his own reflection in the water. His greedy pursuit had cost him his own bone, leaving him with nothing. He regretted his foolishness and recognized the heavy price he had paid for his greed. With no bone and nothing to eat, the dog learned a hard lesson and vowed never to be greedy again. The moral of this story is that greed leads to nothing but loss. It clouds our judgment, making us selfish, impatient, and envious of others. Greed pushes us to make poor decisions, and in the end, it robs us of what we already have. Instead of being driven by the desire for more, we should be content with what we possess and avoid coveting what belongs to others. Greed blinds us to the true value of our own blessings and prevents us from approaching life's challenges with wisdom and courage. True satisfaction comes from hard work and appreciating what we already have, rather than chasing after what isn't ours.